Well, thank you very much for inviting me along here. When Paul first asked me, I thought, Paul's kind of up Inverness, well that's fine, I'll get up there and no problem. I didn't realise it would be 6 hours in the car. Glad to be here nonetheless. And whilst it's great that our leader and First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has lovely words to say, don't worry yourselves because my father takes great pride in telling me that he's now sick of the sight of my face. Well, I thought, when I first was asked to come here, I thought, what can I really talk about? And I thought, well, in actual fact, my experience and where my life has went in the last year and a bit is actually quite symbolic of what's happened to Scotland. Because when I first started getting involved in politics, I just started leafleting. I just happened to go along to a SNP meeting and I was out the Paisley Town Centre just handing things out, and then I ended up chatting people's doors. But you'll know yourself that as that referendum campaign went on, people began to get more and more educated, people began to get more and more engaged. And where at one point you would hand somebody a leaflet and they'd go, oh no, away you go. Eventually people were going, actually, can I take that? They were coming back and saying, what's going to happen if X happens? What's going to happen to my pension? What's going to happen to the pound? People started to become educated, and all of a sudden these dots began to get connected. All of a sudden people were realising, in actual fact, politics does affect me, it affects my life. People were starting to realise that, hold on a minute, why is it that prices are going up but my wages aren't? Why is it that I'm struggling to meet the bills at the end of the month? Oh, it's because of that cut. Oh, my MP should be doing this. In fact, what has my MP been doing? Oh, they were asking all these questions. And I became more involved that way. Suddenly I was asking questions. And as I began to get more and more involved, I had the fortunate chance of meeting Jim Sillars. And he eventually took me around in his Margot Mobile campaign all around Scotland on this daft big bus with speakers blaring at the corner. But what's most symbolic to me is there was one time we were in the East End of Glasgow, just outside Celtic Park, and there was a wee burger fan, and there was a woman in it who you just would not mess with. You know, she was spatula in hand, you just thought, no, I'm not going there. So I'm jumping around the van, stretching my legs, and Jim's giving it hell through the speakers, you know, about why we should vote yes. And all the activists were going up to this woman, and she was getting really angry at them. She was like, look, I'm not voting yes, I'm voting no, that's it, end of story. So they all kind of went away quite disheartened. I was quite hungry, so I just went up to the van anyway. And I was up there, and I ended up speaking to her for about 8 minutes. And by the time I walked away, she had a yes poster. I like to think it had nothing to do with the fact that I bought 5 rolls and sausage, right? But she didn't take it. But that's what happened, was all of a sudden it was okay to talk about politics. All of a sudden you could walk into a pub and say, what are you voting? And it wasn't a weird question, and everybody knew what you were talking about. I remember going into my local pub and I saw 2 guys sitting at the bar who normally just talk about football all the time, and they were getting into a really heated argument, and they were talking about a currency union. You know, so all of a sudden imaginations were sparked. So then what happened, obviously the referendum, I didn't get the result that I wanted, and I'm sure many people in this room didn't want. But everything that changed was a positive. And in the general election, we've seen something that I don't think anybody expected. I certainly didn't expect it. I was disheartened on the 19th. I thought, that's it, it's done. Hell Mendes, we've voted no. God knows what's coming. And yet all of a sudden, folk were like, no, this isn't on anymore. We're not going back in our box. We didn't campaign for 2 years. We didn't give up 2 years of our lives for things to go back to normal, to go back to business as usual. And what we've seen was that education carrying on into every single household in Scotland. We started to realise that when we were chapping doors, political spin wasn't working anymore. Old political rhetoric wasn't working. Where I come from was a Labour stronghold. This idea, vote Labour, keep out the Tories. The answer to that, even on council estates and all over the place, was we have been voting Labour and we're still getting Tories. And it's sharp as tacks. In fact, there was one point where I walked through a council estate, and I mean, this was the Labour heartland. I don't get nervous talking politics, but even I was a wee bit nervy going into this street. And I was walking down the road and there was a group of guys sitting out the front just drinking cans of beer. So I could see them and one of them clocked me and all that rage just filled in his face. And he got up and he started charging down the driveway. I thought, God, here we go. And I had a big SNP high-vis jacket on. So I thought, just, it's fine, just talk to him, it'll be cool. Just give your arguments and that's it. He came storming down and I had the big SNP badge there. He came right on and went, see you! I'm voting for you! So the change was incredible. And we've seen that when we saw the general election results coming in. I mean, 56 out of 59 SNP is phenomenal. It is unheard of, and if you'd said that to anyone a year ago, they would have laughed at it. So what happened was people gave this union one more chance. They thought, we've made our voices heard, go down there and argue for it. Now, as Paul touched on, me and him were lucky enough to be part of that, going down with that big team of folk to go down and try and change things, try and make things better. And the unfortunate thing is that everything we said about Westminster during that referendum campaign is true. It is absolutely true, and in some cases it's worse than I would have ever imagined. It is still misogynistic, it is still a boys' club, it is still closed-minded, it is still filled with self-serving, arrogant people who have no interest in anything to do other than themselves. It is to do with people that are out of touch and that have no idea as to how policy is affecting normal people. You see that everywhere you go. It's not even just in the chamber. You see that ignorance in the corridors, in the dining rooms and in the meetings. Everywhere. Now, the one positive, and I mean I'm stretching the definition of the word positive here, but the one thing that I can take as a positive from Westminster is it has only served to solidify my belief that Scotland can only ever reach its full potential unless we are independent. We will only ever become a nation. My biggest frustration, and the reason why I support independence above all else, is because there will still be a constant democratic deficit. I don't know about Paul, but one of the greatest things that gets under my skin is when we have to sit in that chamber, we contribute to the debate. In fact, we turn up for a start in the chamber. We contribute for hours in debates. We give really articulate, well thought through, reasonable arguments. Sometimes we actually convince the odd Tory that we're right. But yet when that division bell goes, when the vote is called, all of a sudden 200 people who've not stepped foot in the chamber all day come troopsing through and they vote against whatever's been said. We can be outvoted so easily within that chamber, despite the fact that Scotland sent back 95% of its MPs on a basis of anti-austerity. We've had to sit by and watch austerity be pushed through regardless of anything we say. No matter what amendments we put through, they are all voted down constantly. We will always be at the behest of whatever England, as the predominant part of the UK, chooses to vote, and unfortunately that is quite often Conservative. Now, when you actually think about some of the things that are being pushed through, I sometimes need to pinch myself, and I just think, how have we ended up in this situation? £12 billion of cuts to welfare. Now I know that figures get thrown about all the time and that sometimes they can lose all meaning. £12 billion. Even if you take one aspect, right, one aspect of that £12 billion cut in the tax credit cut. Now I sat on Tuesday on that debate, again, calling the government for one last time, please reverse this. Now, all the figures suggest it, the IFS, internal party politics suggests it, even the Adam Smith Institute, who the Conservatives love to quote, has said that people will be worse off because of their cuts. In fact, it hits people in work the hardest. I'm tired of sitting listening to Tories telling me we are the party of work, we want to make work pay, all the while they're making people in work on average lose £1,300. How do they justify that? Even if you include those out of work in tax credit, people on average are losing £750. Now, while that might be nothing to Mr Osborne, that's something to the mother that has to work out how she's going to feed her child that month. That means something to the father that has to choose between heating the house and heating the dinner. That's what that difference is, and they fail to grasp that. And they send out this spin of, oh, we've introduced a national living wage. A national living wage that is 65 pence below what the rate of living wage actually is. Even with the living wage being introduced, people are still £500 worse off. Now that party love to talk to us especially about financial black holes. They're about to create financial black holes of £500 for so many families. In fact, I think the figure's 8.4 million people in the UK, and they're getting away with it. And they're getting away with it because we are at their mercy, because we're part of this union, and there's no escaping that fact. When they talk about saving 4.4 billion, I mean, I was saying in the car on the way up, the amount of wee communities you drive through. I started off in Paisley and then Glasgow right the way up, and you see these cities that are bustling, you know, it's non-stop, you can't move, and there's business everywhere, there's KFCs all over the place. And then you drive up and you find these small communities that just have their local co-op. They've got a post office, they've got fishmongers, a baker's, and a school. And that's it. They build what they need. Well, see when the Tories say that they're going to take £4.4 billion in savings, what they're really meaning is they're going to take £4.4 billion out of the pockets of ordinary people. And what that means is £4.4 billion out of these communities. If people stop spending money, you can't spend money if you don't have it in your pocket in the first place. And it's, I mean, we get lectured timelessly on the long-term economic plan all the time, northern powerhouses and all the rest of it, and yet it makes no sense. And it is despite all of these figures, all of these statistics, all of these sound arguments, they push through with it anyway. And that only serves to prove that we're at the hands of a government that has no interest in helping ordinary people whatsoever, no interest at all. It's an ideological crusade that they're on. They're trying to finish off the work of Thatcher, and unfortunately they're getting away with it so far. Now, Paul mentioned at the start there, evil English votes for English laws. Now, I'm genuinely shocked at how little this has been reported in the mainstream media. This is the biggest constitutional change to happen in the UK, probably, in fact, since devolution, since the creation of the Scottish Parliament. This law that has been passed is shabby, it is lazy, because it is just an adjustment to the standing orders, basically the rule book of Parliament. They just thought, we'll push it through and it'll be fine. But what they've effectively done is they have made first and second class MPs now. They create this thing whereby they say, I mean, it sounds logical on the surface. If the Scottish Parliament get to vote with elected Scottish MSPs on certain issues, then why can't English MPs vote on English laws? How can Scottish MPs have a say in that? And the whole point that they're missing is that we actually support English votes for English laws, but do it properly. Build an English Parliament, build an essential assembly like the rest of the UK, or the different constituent parts of the UK. Do not do it by trying to alter the status of elected representatives within the UK chamber. And it's exactly what they've done. But what's more sneaky about it is how they're going to be able to pass things as being English only. For instance, they'll say the NHS budget for England and Wales. That's got nothing to do with Scotland, that's a devolved issue. So the Scottish MPs don't get a vote on it. But the reality is that if they choose to cut or privatise the English and Welsh NHS, that has a knock-on effect onto the Scottish budget. That means that the money that we get to fund our Scottish NHS drops dramatically. Then what do? We've not been able to have a say on that. Where before this law was passed, we could argue in the chamber, don't do that because it's going to affect us. We're still in this position whereby we have one hand tied behind our backs. Yes, we have the full controls over our NHS, but we don't have control over the purse strings. Now, it's not that we don't have any control, we have no say in the purse strings anymore. Even at Heathrow Airport, they're saying on our third runway that doesn't affect you. It completely affects Scotland. It affects what flight paths can come into Scotland. It affects what money Glasgow Airport or Prestwick can get, even Aberdeen or Inverness, it completely affects what happens to the Scottish economy, and yet they've pushed it through shabbily. And the thing that I can't understand is they're going for this English votes for English laws. Well, that's fine then. How's about this? Scottish votes for nuclear weapons in Scotland. How about we introduce that? But no, they don't listen to a single thing. Now, I mean, as I've touched on, it's barely been reported. In fact, the BBC had nothing about it on its Scotland front page. The Daily Record had nothing obvious because I couldn't find anything on it. The Scotsman gave it a tiny part on the front page and half of page 6. And the Herald they punted it as a lead story, and yet they gave it less space than it had devoted to a picture of David Cameron with the Chinese president having a pint. So I just question where the priorities are within this establishment. I question it every day. We've effectively become second-class MPs overnight. I mean, that effectively means that had this bill been passed years before, realistically, there can no longer be a Prime Minister from Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland. Because you'd be a laughing stock if you put forward a bill that turns out you don't get a vote on in the first place, and it can be outvoted by anybody. It's because you're an MP in Wales. But the thing is, I looked through it, and there was an article I found that it said that some of the names that would not have been able to become Prime Minister had this law been in place are people such as James Callaghan, David Lloyd George, Gordon Brown, and even Winston Churchill, who was once the MP for Dundee. So we're talking about really influential people, Prime Ministers, who would not have been able to do it. So when they said better together, did they mean it? When they said we love you Scotland, please stay, lead, don't leave, what did they mean? Because overnight I've become less than some of the people sitting in the chamber across from me. But this is where the Tories have got it wrong. This is where they have made their mistake, and this is where the establishment and this is where British nationalism has yet to catch up. They don't understand what's happened in Scotland. That education I was talking about earlier on, it still exists. People aren't buying it, and people aren't daft. We don't need the Daily Record to report on something to know it's happening. We don't need the BBC to report on something to know that this carpet is being pulled from underneath us. We've educated ourselves to the point that we cannot be fooled anymore. We know that when they talk about a long-term economic plan, they don't know what they're talking about. We know that when they talk about £12 billion saving, what they really mean is cuts. We know that when they put through evil as something that's fair, we know it's not. Now we're in a position where that Scotland's never been in before, that the only reason this stuff is being talked about and punted constantly is because we have such a strong Scottish voice down there. One of the journalists came up to us in the first couple of weeks and said, oh, it's great having so many Scottish MPs down here. And we stopped them and said, they've always been here. Why is it that you're only recognising it now? The number of people who will remain nameless, who have stopped me from all parties and all members of staff and have said to me, you have no idea the difference you guys are making. You really know your stuff. They can't get away from the fact that because we turn up and are able to actually argue quite reasonably something and are able to take interventions and slap people down again and tell them why they're wrong, they've not had that before. They used to get away with not turning up to the chamber. In fact, one Labour MP actually stopped me earlier on this week and said to me, you're actually showing us up. We're having to up the rota so that we can get more bodies in because you're in there so often. When we said that we're going to go down there and make Scotland's voice heard, that wasn't spin, that wasn't just a line, it's something that we genuinely believe in. It's something that, but going by some of the stuff I've mentioned today, it's something that we need more than ever. And that's why May is so important as well. Because when you contrast where I work and everything that they're doing with everything that's happening in the Scottish Government, I really take my hat, and I know I'm a party member, right, so I'm quite biased that way, but I genuinely take my hat off to them. The fact that they've been able to introduce policies like no tuition fees, prescription charges being abolished, The fact that they're able to constantly increase funding into the NHS, childcare, they're realising that the only way that a society can move forward is if you put people first. There is no point to economic plans if it's hurting people. There is no point to economic plans if it's taking money out of people's pockets. Not everybody needs to be a millionaire. Everybody just needs to have a decent standard of life. And your government should be trying to do that. And the very fact that the SNP have been able to do that so far to the best of their ability, all the while having to deal with constant crippling cuts coming from Westminster, I think is a credit to them and it's a credit to the agenda that they're setting. Where we want to be is that when we can have this Scottish voice down there arguing the case and bringing things to light, that's great. But as I said, realistically, there's very rare occasions that we're going to be able to really make a difference to laws. We can be outvoted all the time. So what it can make a difference is making sure that we have colleagues up in the Scottish Parliament that understand our agenda and understand what needs done. So one of the best phrases that ever said to me was, the way you change anything in society is you educate, agitate and organise. We have educated people and we need to continue to educate people. By God, we've agitated a few folk. So now let's get organised. Let's make sure that every single SNP branch can move as best it can. Let's make sure that every single member is out talking to somebody, highlighting all of these things to them, highlighting how important it is that we still have a majority in the Scottish Parliament. Let's all go out there and work to the best of our ability and let's win this election in May. Thanks very much.